I'm going to play you a little bit of a Wild Women blues, and this was written by a woman called Ida Cox, and I'm IDA and COX. I'm glad David Anderson isn't here because he usually goes if he saw his drums.
I think we're all doing that in our heads. We're too well bred to do it.
I know, and it was written in 1924, so it's kind of really contemporary to me. So the lyrics are wonderful. I'll sing the first two sort of verses, if you like, the first two rounds of the blues. It's still on a 12-bar format, but it's got much more words going on. If you know what I mean. It's more complicated, more sophisticated, really. I hear these women talking about their funky men, about their fighting lovers and their no good friends. These poor women sit around all day and moan, wondering why their wandering fathers don't come home. Wild women don't worry, wild women don't have the blues. So the next one is, now I got a disposition way off my own. When my man's mistreating me, I find him another home. I get full of crazy weed, I walk the streets all night. I give my man no chances if he don't act right, 'cause wild women don't worry, wild women don't have the blues. So if you notice any sort of differences and similarities with that, so each line is different. She's managed to.
I think this one brought out so much emotion, and it was a bit more stronger compared to the other one.
Oh, okay, really? I sometimes find the simple one more strong, but then it depends what, if you're thinking of a lyrical point of view, it's stronger, it's more sophisticated, it's telling more of a story, isn't it? I guess sometimes it's lovely, I do loads of like jazz and scatting and shibbity boo boo, and then I hear some blues, and it just is very centering, isn't it? It sort of grounds you back to kind of just that human voice, giving expression to something so painful, really, is where it came from. So we're all aware of the legacy of the blues, like, as in it's where it started. Oh, really? Okay, so like in a capsule, you can all join in and help me, because I'm sure that some do. Yeah, no, that's cool. So blues basically came from
gospel.
Combination.
Gospel, black gospel.
I wouldn't say that, no. I would say
right.
it came after blues.
Right.
Okay. So what I understand is that it's a combination of the African culture meeting America, the Americans. Yeah, do kind of like Wikipedia me on that. If you want to know that, I'm feeling that. Cool. So its roots were basically in slavery, in the existence of slaves.
That's not when the black slaves.
Yes, Africans arrived in America due to slavery. So they ended up on the equivalent of like big ranches and plantations, and it's one of the great sort of modern day, you've got the Holocaust, you've got what happened there, so it's one of the sort of classic, now you've got the Hutsies and Tutsis, it's one of the great modern day sort of atrocities that we sort of don't want to forget. You have some museums around it and stuff, so some of the treatment, we're all adults here, so hardcore, so if you imagine babies getting ripped from their mothers at birth, and landowners kind of doing strange experiments on the slaves, muzzling them, treating them much worse than they did the animals on their plantation, but also making them work very hard, keeping them chained, whipping them. Sometimes using them like animals, so there's stories about them drinking the milk from women, ripping off their legs and drinking their milk. Okay, so I'm going straight to the worst of it, not the worst of it, but I'm going straight to the point, otherwise it would be a very long catalogue, but that bad and more, So that is where this music came out of, this kind of life. And actually there were generations of people who lived that whole life in that way, and then died, and their children lived that whole life in that way. It went on, just
repetitive again.
Yeah.
So it's actually the cycle of blues itself.
That's true. Yeah, there is a correlation there. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty much, it's quite interesting actually, because when you come to the end of blues, it's got this chord. And you have to go again. And that's actually in the nature of blues, that this. Not it's called a chord that doesn't resolve. It needs to carry on to. And you have to start. Can you hear that? That kind of waiting to begin again. So there's a real there's a real cycle. You were talking about the cycle within the sort of tragedy or history. And there is a real cycle within the blues that it just continues. So that's how bad it was, and it kept going on. And 400 years?
Probably, I guess, yeah. 200 years since, 200 years since transatlantic slavery, yeah. Just over 200 years, no, 207, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, 205.
Cool. Very bad.
But I mean, that's since the end of transatlantic. I mean, how long did slavery go on for?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so maybe it was for, I'm going from the end point. Yeah.
Now, my names and dates and dates are really rubbish, so, any sort of confirmation of
well, no, I think we're kind of between us, it's sort of the end. But
400 years, 100 years.
Yeah.
And he was singing that in the 70s.
Yeah, there you go.
I know.
I find it quite disturbing how recently it all came to an end, though. To think only 200 years ago we were still doing it.
Yes. The blues is a massive. The blues is massive. Slavery as a subject is massive. Why do people do it? There's other sort of aspects to it that African tribes were involved themselves, and they had a heritage of slavery themselves, but it didn't tend to be on that level. It was kind of more within a sort of ordered structure, like often for people who had done wrong, so like a form of prison. So they even had a thing, some tribes where if you stole from a house, you would have to go into service or be enslaved for them, things like that. So, there's loads of people sort of debate about this and whether, they were sort of obviously participants in their own people's, thing. So and the understanding throughout history sort of changes as more information and more thinkers add their penny's worths. But the sort of latest thing, one of the latest things I heard, which I found very interesting, was that I heard sort of exposition about it had to happen, sort of basically saying it had to happen for Americans, white Americans obviously, to build a new country. They needed this bogeyman. They had to, otherwise they were just kind of chased off Native Americans who were much better at hunting into there's another tragedy there, but it's like they kind of needed that in order to be great, to build. All the greatest nations are built on the backs of something, like the Egyptian pyramids, or in England with empire, and it's apparently always the way.
They are so great, really, don't they?
Great.
The wealth, the wealth of this country, certainly, if you go to any of the big Bristol, Plymouth, they're all built on certain.
Apparently it's like, you could actually draw a table, to describe this. This has always been the way. Yes, so, what would happen? Okay, so initially, if you imagine slaves out on the fields, the original, they do say the original thing was it's called the field holler. When you holler out. So the field holler was like, they began, maybe had their little kids with them and they were working on fields like picking cotton and what have you, is like the most common activity. It could be anything, chain gang type thing, breaking stones, what have you. And in order to sort of fulfill the criteria, and also there were some slaves who were probably sort of like fairly well treated, just didn't have much of a life. So there were some healthy ones, and some different, massive. Across America, so they would actually sing to each other, very simple kind of a field shout, like we're all gonna pick some cotton. We're gonna pick some cotton. And it might have been, you know, probably based around this sort of African pentatonic scale, it's called, which is sort of a set of notes. Find them for you. So, you know, working hard all day, and then everyone else, you can do it for me if you like. Okay, so I'm going to be the fields hollow slave, and you can be the ones behind me. So, are you all right to sing down? Because sometimes it's quite a last thing, isn't it? We can do that, can't we? We're working hard all day.
Working hard all day.
We're gonna pick some cotton.
We're gonna pick some cotton.
Sweating for the boss.
Sweating for the boss.
Keeping ourselves alive.
Keeping ourselves alive.
Cool. You need to be field the leader. Yeah. So the person with the loudest voice, it became a sort of tradition. The person with the loudest voice would be placed in front in order to keep them up. And actually, those slaves who could keep everyone working. So they noticed that it motivated the spirits, and they managed to hit like 20 bales instead of 15 bales a day. So it became really sort of important to the slaves for their own selves, but to the slave masters as well. So they would give special recognition to the leader, the one with the voice who could do that, and they had privileges and things like that. So it actually became the kind of special position, that person with the voice who could get everybody working harder. So if you heard what we just did as you were doing it, singing it, it has a blues sensibility to it already, doesn't it?
Yes, that's here.
We're just having like a little discussion about blues. I think you kind of know, you know really with the background about the blues, the legacy of the blues and sort of the slave thing, where they're working on fields and doing call and response, kind of chain gang type stuff. So yeah, that's kind of the start of the blues. So this is and obviously, like, it would take a long time to go into all the sort of the way in which it developed, and there are sort of lots of different ideas about how it first developed. There was also the introduction of like sort of Baptist, usually hymns that would be imposed. Like they realised that when they sang in the field, they were sort of like worked harder. They realised when they gave them religion, then they had something to cling to. It kept them alive. So they were allowed to sort of form their own churches. But these slaves would be illiterate and uneducated, and they didn't have the written word, didn't know to read English, and in fact, you know, there was a lot of effort made to keep them from learning that. But you know, the slave owners were like, okay, we'll torture them, we'll whip them, but they must get baptised. We'll save their souls. Why laughing? So they had their own sort of churches, and that was often the preacher, again, almost singing, you know, and you still see that, you still see those things. So we see echoes of the field holler in the chain gangs, like chain gang songs, and football, we see it, where, you know, where people are trying to rouse and rally themselves, everywhere we go,
yeah,
people always
and the army as well, this I don't know, but I meant to,
yes, the best. Yeah, so it's remained in America, actually in its kind of in its original form almost, because it's such a strong, simple thing to do for children. So yeah, it's got lovely sort of talking things, so you don't have to be like an amazing singer to go, you can kind of like shout it out. It's for everyone. So the preachers in these churches would kind of be singing as well, like, I say to you, come down to love, and then people would join into glory, glory, you know, and they would learn parts of the gospel. Oh, so when you're saying gospel, the Baptist hymns, if you like. It wasn't gospel as in fully formed kind of
No.
Yes.
Early gospel. Because a lot of Elvis stuff came originally from gospel stuff.
Yes.
Which
so that did transform into the roots of black gospel music, if you like, within the churches. So because they weren't reading from the Bible, they'd learn some Bible passages, they'd expound on them, and then turn that into song. So it's one of these meetings would have been a constant kind of exhortations, some preaching, and then the singers would sort of join in, and also the call and response would begin in those churches as well. So it's like, and I tell you, amen, and I promise you, I know, one day we'll cross the river, yeah, and go to the Jordan victory side, amen. Yeah. So and also the foot stamping became very syncopated, so there was a kind of rhythm, and also the other element was that slaves would escape, and they became political, and they would fight. Well, not fight really, actually just escape. They didn't really rise up to revolt. They would talk about it, yes. So there would be lots of references, and there's also a word that they would use. Some people are uncomfortable using it now, the Negro spiritual. So out of the field holler, and also these songs that were about one day. They had almost a code. So the River Jordan was something that they would talk about getting across the River Jordan, and they would sing these songs, but like there was little codes within their meaning that one day we know if we cross this river we'll get across. But also the River Jordan is in the Bible, the crossing of the river with the Israelites escaping Egypt. So it's kind of like biblical references that they've learned mixed up with this sort of kind of coded messaging about we'll escape, but also the idea that for some of them escape meant dying. So one day we'll cross the River Jordan to the other side, which is the other side of, beyond the afterlife. Yeah, so there's things like that you might have heard. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. We all know, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
Do you sing that?
Yeah, I love that song.
I know, we don't get to do it often because it's become a bit like, I'll say nobody really does it.
I love the way you
If you ever...
Oh yeah, I'm actually looking, but I don't know what some of the time but sometimes.
I don't know, a lot of people like singing, but I can't get on with them.
If you ever get the chance to listen and get hold of the album of the concert Woodstock, what was it? Joan Baez stood up and did an a cappella version of it on stage in front of 750,000 people. It was, I'll tell you, the hairs go up on the back of your neck. It's awesome.
It's wonderful.
She can hit the lips like.
She's singing. She's still there. Okay, 2, 3.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. Band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
Wonderful, thank you. What lovely voices. Great. Oh, that's nice. Just break into song once in a while. So yeah, so that's so beautiful, isn't it? That song, so beautiful. The sweet chariot, come and take me, basically. So that's where those sort of songs, and the blues, I think, came into its own after slavery. So after emancipation, which kind of happened in a couple of stages. So south it's the other side, it was north of America, but and the river that was in between, and then later the south had to kind of give in. But they didn't really give up their evil ways of hanging. They were still hanging black people from trees for a good couple of generations after that. And in fact, a a lot of black people still don't wander around on their own in the south of America.
That's right, yeah.
So yeah, this is awful, you know, stuff. And when they were emancipated, some free slaves or free men, I'm thinking particularly because it was quite a male tradition. So they grow women performers and singers as well. But at the moment, with this sort of back then, it's still quite a male thing. They found that a lot of them found they're in a worse position because some of them were like, okay, we get the odd whipping, but we are fed and we are sheltered, and we've got food and shelter. When they were sort of freed, they were just on their own. So some of them were going back to plantations and not getting fed, not getting sheltered, and not getting paid enough to feed themselves. So a lot of difficulty continued. And there were people, probably especially that first generation, that were sort of released, if you like. And also perhaps some malnutrition, some congenital stuff. There were a lot, it seems like there's a high proportion of blind men, black blind men, or it may just be that if you were blind, obviously you couldn't work. It was just basically, not the original wisdom of blind, black and blind, and they would fashion what became a guitar, actually Spanish. They would fashion something with strings, banjos, and play for their living. So actually I'm a bit sketchy on that. I'm not sure. I would sometimes think about it and think, who gave them money? Maybe they just got paid by their own people to entertain them. Who had the money to pay them. But yeah, you make us pay for your pennies and stuff. So you have like blind Lemon Jefferson and blind boy Harry, blue skies. A lot of them started off blind because they couldn't work in the fields.
There's a guy that's going around the circuit these days called C6T, who's very much in that sort of tradition.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at his guitar, how on earth can you play something like that? It's like 3 strings and a piece of wood and nails all over it, and the sound this guy gets out of it. But it's very much a rhythmic thing. It's like blues as a music as anything. It's setting up a rhythm. And it's building on that. Sorry, I'm not. It's building on that rhythm.
Yeah, I'm really sort of got into the rhythm of it. Yeah, I suppose. And I suppose I don't know, people, it's a mystery. People like, why do we love the blues? Because it came out of all that pain, and then after sort of, black people were more settled, they still used blues to express their sort of dissatisfaction with life. My woman's left me, I'm drinking too much, I'm fighting the man, when will I see a better life type of thing. So it's a blues tradition, people write a bit, it's rarely a cheerful blues. I've got the blues, it's a phrase, I'm feeling down, I'm feeling low. But we love to hear it, there's some consolation in it. Just works for us.
It's a release of those emotions, I suppose, isn't it? And a way of saying, hey, we all feel.
Yeah,
that's right.
Kind of a collective thing.
I suppose people believe in God, there's quite a lot of references to God in the blues as well.
There are, yeah. Obviously, we talked about how sort of the church and the gospel became, there's references to going into the afterlife or waiting for a bit.
Yeah, like going up yonder and stuff like that.
I don't know whether it's actual fact or not, but it was interesting. I sat in once with a seminar with Eric Clapton, and he was talking about the blues, and he was talking about how in very much a lot of blues, the actual lead guitar is the emotional thing, because it's built on the top of the basic rhythm.
Yes.
But it's almost like another language coming in on top of blues.
If you think, I can't play lead guitar,
right,
but if you think of the sound of it, so let me just try and pretend on a lead guitar.
That's good.
It sounded like you were round of a bike.
Yeah.
Voice.
And it actually sounded like anything but a guitar. But, it's got this bending quality to it.
Very much.
Crying, expressive thing, yes, that fits with the voice.
Yes.
And it can be seen as Baba Cass in the house. So it can be, it could be seen as another voice. And also it does the call and the response. So you have like a hello, Baba Cass. Hi. Been shopping. So I'm just trying to think how it could be, the call and response, how I could sort of demonstrate that, but you know the sound of it. I mean, everybody, mostly. Hey Bob, we're talking about the blues.
Not Monday, right?
Monday, there's Monday blues. Everyone got the early morning blues. So you could have someone singing, you know, and then guitar. So it's often this kind of call and response. And sometimes that can be two guitars as well. And in later days, it can become quite combative. As I say, it's a male, predominantly male, particularly in the guitar tradition. Singers obviously sort of began to females eventually sort of like actually quite began to dominate the blues, especially when it sort of turned into jazz singers. But yeah, quite male dominated for many years, and so you know it became quite combative too. I guess call and response basically can be used for anything, because what is call and response? It's a conversation. It's talking. So I say something and you respond. So it's quite interesting, you know, just how call and response gets used in music, because first it's the field holler, you know, as we talked about, you know, we got to work for the man, we got to work for the man, we got to keep our spirits up, we got to keep our spirits up, this kind of thing. And then we talked about gospel and church, preacher saying one answer, and so call and response has been used because it's just a conversation. And eventually when you know, a lot of black people and white people getting involved in the blues, and just Americans generally, they're all a bit better fed. They're still moaning and they're still finding life hard. But then it changes and it becomes combative, you know. I'm telling about the news sort of thing. You know, so this call and response is a different conversation. And I guess that's where I'm sort of coming to lyrically. I think the blues are still amazing formats in which to explore the downside of life, if you like. And sometimes it's quite witty and cheerful. You know. The song I started off with, my man don't love me, he treats me awful mean, he's the lowest man that I've ever seen. I mean, I find that quite witty. And then the next bit is, he wears high grey pants, stripes of green and yellow. He wears high grey pants, stripes of green and yellow. But when he starts to love me, he's so fine and mellow. So there's this kind of resignation. And the next one is, if you treat me right, baby, I'd stay home every day. Which to me is quite suggestive, isn't it? Like, get out of bed, basically. Treat me right, baby, won't you treat me right? So sometimes that line even gets a little bit mixed up, but it is essentially like, I stay home every day. And then the next line, and you're so mean to me, baby. You know you're gonna drive me away. You know, I think when the blues are sung well, which sometimes I hit it right, you have this varying sense in that voice. You're so mean to me, and it's just like such a perfect vehicle for expression. And she sings with the last one. She sings, "Love make you drink and gamble." Make you stay out all night long. Love will make you drink and gamble. Make you stay out all night long. Love will make you do things that you know is wrong. So he wants to start again, back in the cycle of the last one, the last verse is, love is like a faucet. Does everybody hear? New version. Lovely.
Goodness me, it's like...
I'm just going to keep going if you don't mind. Is that all right? Sean? Nice one.
Come on over there.
I might come back to you. So the last verse, everyone knows four-set is attack, yeah? American. Love is like a four-set. It turns on and off. Love and again, love is like a four-set. Turns off and on. And then we got the answer. Just when you think it's on, baby, it is turned off and gone. So that's the rest of that song I started with. My man don't love me, treats me awful. So she starts off, she sets it up. This is how it is, you know. Then she says, but I like him. He wears high grade pants and stripes of green and yellow, and when he starts to love me, he's fine and mellow. And then she pleads with him, if you treat me right, baby, I'd stay home, you're so mean to me. And then she goes into a bit of philosophical. No, then she kind of gets really like, love will make you drink and gamble, this is where I'm at, you know. Makes you do things wrong. And then the end is quite philosophical, isn't it? Love is like a force-set, just when you think it's all right. So it's a beautiful shape to it. And like you were saying, you know, like, you liked the other one, the wild, well, obviously I like it because it's got a bit more to it. The Wild Women blues. It's kind of the opposite story in a way, isn't it? Just saying, you know, I see these women talking about their funky men, their fighting husbands and no good friends. They sit around all day and moan, wondering, I love that one, wondering when they want, wondering why their wandering couples don't come home. While women don't worry, while women don't have the blues, and he quite like that. Yeah. I'm still drawn to this, to the one I sang that's so simple because you can hear the crying. Some of it's just not PC now. Some of it has to, you know, I sing it, nobody's business, if you've ever heard that, nobody's business what I do.
I think sometimes it's different. Because sometimes that word has an impact on you, but sometimes the way you play the tune, the word, that could so it's hard from the two that you sang.
Yeah.
And so I'm like thinking which one to choose, but the way you played it, it just brought out emotion.
Yeah, I think the first one, the simple one, is like really reliant on delivery, isn't it? It has to be performed with a sense of that blues.
Why did you say it's not PC? Is it because like it's about abuse or?
Yes. Okay. Here's a song. Yeah, it's a bit lazy, PC, you know, not PC anything. Okay, here's a song. Nobody's Business. I've never played it on guitar, and I always see to go to E. If I should get the notion, I'll sing it with that one. Take a while to find the chords. If I should get the notion. So just jump right into the ocean. Ain't nobody's business if I do. And then she sings, if I go to church on Sundays and then a cabaret all day Mondays, ain't nobody's business if I do. Great stuff. Next. I swear I won't call no copper if I'm beat up by my papa. Ain't nobody's business if I do. I'd rather my man would hit me than for him to just run right up and quit me. Ain't nobody's business if I do. And then there's, you know, if I give him my last nickel and it leaves me in a pickle, ain't nobody's business. No, it's really weird because I sing that song and sometimes I don't want to sing it. I haven't got the energy for it as well because I sort of think, but then other times I've sung it just like that because I think it's adhering to that story of that time. It's authentic, and that's what they sang, and that's what their lives were. And also, there's something very particular to the song, that mixture of defiance and resigned but defiant. You know, this is my life, it's kind of wrong, but it's nobody's business how I conduct it. So, you know, that's what I mean. Some songs are like that, and it's like, should we still sing them? You know, do we present them as a museum piece or, you know, in character? I guess if I'm going to perform those words, I do them in character. I see it as a sort of theatrical character piece.
Because you could play that part in a play,
of course,
didn't you?
Yes.
So if you put it in that
if you're on stage performing it, But obviously, as a vocalist, I'm aware of the different types of gigs that I have because my own lyrics tend to be quite sort of aware about my belief systems and things like that. So I probably wouldn't sing that song unless I really explained it within my kind of Mellow Baku doing her own thing. But maybe if I'm presenting a jazz 1920s, 30s jazz set, then I would kind of...
I think it's like blues and everything else goes through history, but I mean, there's modern stuff. There's a guy that's on the folk circuit, he does a lot of blues, but he brought it out of miners' strike, out of the 80s, and it's really out of struggle. You know, he says that it's out of struggle. It's a whole blues thing, purely out of a situation and struggle.
Well, this is where I'm sort of trying to, this is where I'm kind of heading, talking about 21st century blues, really, and exactly how it can be transformed. You know how saying the call and response aspect has always just sort of changed throughout time. The lyrics will change, and I'm thinking what our lyrics will be. And I'm sort of thinking, actually, it's just a perfect vehicle to keep, you know, to have a bit of a moan. You know, obviously we're not in the same. I don't think any of us are saying our life is as bad as they were, you know, for the slaves who sang the original blues. Hopefully, God willing, I don't want to presume. But it's interesting that you came in talking about a woman that you kind of met that you felt had worse than you type thing. And we can look at the blues for that, but I do think it's still a lovely vehicle. We can take simple blues and you can, you know, we can have a moan from the blues. So, you know, I was joking with my friend yesterday, and we were talking about predistribution blues. That's Ed Miliband's speech is all about predistribution. I don't know. I don't really know what it means, which we said. I don't know. You know, like with welfare and stuff, they call it redistribution of wealth, as in the benefit system is set up so that some people who can afford it pay some tax in, and then some people who need it. So that's redistribution. And now there's this new thing they're talking about. I don't know, it might be good, called pre-distribution. So like saying, let's not get to that. I don't know, but people are kind of mocking it, and I don't really know what it means. So it's just like one of these sort of politicians speak. He's kind of nicked it off an academic and wrote a book about it. Probably somebody who might know what it means, but pre-distribution blues. It just sounds good. One Nation blues.
Are you looking at it on the internet?
No, I'm just making notes on a notebook.
Oh, okay.
We'll probably all find out eventually.
I'm interested in this call and response thing because, of course, it sort of the great division came as soon as the Trezenia March came in, and you had the people on stage, and you no longer had the experience that I had in Nigeria with any event. People were responding and that kind of thing, and that gets broken into in the Western tradition. But are we changing? Are we changing that back?
Yes. Slow down a little bit, because the Trezenia March, you know, it's within theatre, so it's a form of
restriction. It's kind of like you draw the curtain.
Big stages and the curtain comes across. So you're talking about the connection between the audience and response,
and being encouraged.
In the Western world, that kind of went, didn't it? So what you're wondering, sort of like how you want to see that come back, really, don't you? That.
But also, women are much more given to conversation than men as well, and so there's a sense that this is growing. Do you sense that you get response? You know, do you get much vocal response when you're performing?
No, I think people are still a bit reserved. Not particularly this group. Everybody just burst into song at one point earlier. It's a shame that I love that. You would die for that.
Do it again.
We can do it again for you, Bob. But like, I think most people are like,
don't you think that that's part of Britishness? I mean, certain countries around the world, you would never. I mean, in a Latin American country, you would never get that. If people want to respond, they will respond. They will let you know in no uncertain terms.
But there's a whole etiquette, like you say, that's built up around the stage. The stage. And I used to really want a stage, always. So I'd hate it when I got booked to do a little gig, say in a restaurant, and there's no stage, and I'm like, I'm singing, actually I wouldn't usually play if I was doing jazz because I don't do crazy jazz guitar, so I bring a crazy jazz guitar to sing with them. And so we turn up in a corner and there's a table of people eating and it's like, kind of, where's my space as a performer? You know, this is too intimate, it's like, and you can actually hear me acoustically singing without this microphone. And I didn't like that. I was like, if I get a stage, I felt like rabbit in the headlights, it's all too close. If I get a stage, I've got a bit distance, and then I can come forward. So that was just me as a performer. However, I've had to suck it up because that's
It makes you have to make your own stage. Well, a bit like Lyrical now.
You make your own area.
Yeah, you make your own area.
But also in your mind you make your own stage. You have to sort of present yourself. But the thing is, over the years, I've been self-employed for 10 years doing gigs. There's so many gigs like that I've done. I've had to suck it up and enjoy it. So now I'm like, yeah, and I'm kind of, I like both now. I do like a bit of stage where you can kind of
protection and
just be a bit more gestural and create something. And then I'm also now had to become comfortable with, well, this kind of thing, just sitting around on the chair playing guitar. Maybe I've just grown up a little bit. Lost, can't afford that level of self-consciousness.
When you used to feel like that?
Well, you see, I have to be careful here. You trying to
I'm just wondering. I was just curious.
How old was I
when you used to feel like that about
early 20s.
But I can understand.
Yes.
Because that's like a young girl, you know.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it probably is.
So that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Because I can understand from the perspective why you felt like that, you know.
Yeah. Just this open.
You have to be protected.
Self-aware.
Yeah, self-aware.
And for me, a stage would protect me.
Yes.
And even like when there's bright lights and you can't see people very well, that felt quite good because you're just looking at a blur and just it doesn't matter who's there, you can imagine who's there. But when I could actually see people, singing to me, I was like, it's too much. So yeah, sorry.
well, I mean, there are gender issues, of course, as well, aren't there? Because if women are sort of openly expressive and that kind of thing, that can be read in this society as an invitation. So there's also that difficulty. But I'm very interested in that kind of audience engagement, which
you are.
is
You always make sure that happens when you're when you're at the helm. You do make the audience.
Well, Jean was very positive about that in the way in which you can construct it so that it